In the name of Jesus, thank you so much that I'm just so excited in my spirit for everything that you're doing, the way that you're shaking things up, the way that you're moving people around. I think just about all of our church has moved in the last 3 or 6 months, and you're clearly moving us in a direction to the next level. I pray that our hearts are prepared. I pray that we're receiving the messages that you are sending into our heart person and not just keeping them in our mind, and that we're responding from our hearts to these messages. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's give the Lord a hand. All right. Today's message, it's a trap. How God makes his authority look vulnerable to draw out the enemy from within. I know all of you guys are logged on, but I really miss seeing all of you in your various facial expressions, from people that look like they're falling asleep to people that look really excited. At least the booth is helping me out a little bit. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right, key verse for today, Luke 2:34 from the NLT. Then Simeon blessed them, and he said to Mary, the baby's mother, "This child is destined to cause many in Israel to fall, and many others to rise. He has been sent as a sign from God, but many will oppose him." This is still true today as Jesus brings his authority through his people, through his leaders, through his pastors, who he's chosen. And so this opposition still happens today, and the falling of people, the Israel people, still happens. It's not talking about the natural born-a-Jew people. It's talking about people that are actually Christians falling, and then others to rise. And what it shows is this falling and rising is connected to those who oppose him. And let's take a look at some examples of that. First, let's look at the definition of vulnerable. 1, capable of or susceptible to being wounded or hurt, as if by a weapon. Or 2, open to moral attack, criticism, temptation, etc. Or 3, of a place, open to assault, difficult to defend. And the question I pose here is God vulnerable? Let's take a look at this verse. John 18:1-3. After saying these things, Jesus crossed the Kidron Valley with his disciples and entered a grove of olive trees. Judas, the betrayer, knew this place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. The leading priests and Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him. Now, with blazing torches, lanterns, and weapons, they arrived at the olive grove. Why the olive grove? Right? You guys aren't here, so I can't actually make you answer, so I have to answer it. The olive grove is because the Pharisees were afraid to arrest Jesus when the people were around. So they needed an opportunity where Jesus was vulnerable as they saw it, because they think in terms of who the people are, where the people are, what the people think. And so their sense of vulnerable is Jesus doesn't have people around, and their sense of power is blazing torches, lanterns, and weapons, and guards. And so Judas knows about this vulnerability of the Lord because he's an inside man. The Pharisees didn't know about this. Judas knows where Jesus likes to go and pray. Judas knows that not many people are there. Judas knows about this vulnerability, and he's taking advantage of it as he betrays the Lord. So this looks like the ultimate vulnerability, because Jesus is betrayed by Judas. He's then made to hang, exposed on a cross. Like I just said, Judas knew where Jesus would be, but in the end, Judas was exposed as the traitor and as a spy, and he was made to hang from a tree. He hung himself. And then his blessings and his positions would go to another. And the reason I start with this example is because this is exactly how it plays out every single time that God makes his authority look vulnerable, draws out the enemy from within to go for the kill, and then in the end, the enemy is the one that usually takes exactly what they thought they were going to do against God's authority. And then usually this is what happens. It actually releases something the next level of blessing for his people. So in this case, Jesus' physical body gets broken, but his spiritual body gets elevated. And the reason his spiritual body gets elevated is in part because it's removing this toxin that's within his church, right? He has a spy within the ranks, but now the spy is being removed. And just like we saw in that first verse, the blessing from Simeon, it's still playing out. Those that are opposing him fall. This includes Judas, and this also includes the Pharisees. God makes his authority to appear vulnerable, and that purpose is to draw out the enemy. And like I was just saying, typically the leader who suffers this vulnerability unlocks a great blessing for the people. Then the false followers are exposed, and they suffer the very consequences they were trying to put onto the Lord's authorities. And the blessing and the position that was supposed to flow and be given to those who decided to oppose the Lord, those are going to be stripped from them, and then those are going to be given to the actual true followers, the ones that actually choose to cover the authority. We're going to look at another example, some key verses here. Numbers 16, 1 through 2, NLT. One day Korah, son of Izhar, a descendant of Kohath, son of Levi, conspired with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, from the tribe of Reuben. They incited a rebellion against Moses along with 250 other leaders of the community, all prominent members of the assembly. Number 16:32. This is their judgment. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the men along with their households and all their followers who were standing with them and everything they owned. We've preached on this a lot, but we still need to cover it because the level of presence of God is going to increase on the earth. And with more presence, more accountability. Assistant pastor preached on this, I think, last week. With more presence, more accountability. And we have to keep covering this because you have to be aware, and I've talked about this before, anytime I think about Bible characters, when I'm honest, I can see all the Bible characters happening inside of me at any given time. And so I want to constantly be aware and constantly be checking myself to see what's happening in my heart. Now, Moses is betrayed by Korah and his company. They doubt his leadership as they wander in the wilderness. Moses appears vulnerable because the people are uncomfortable. Korah believes he can hear God. He wanted a higher position, so he gathered people to himself to gain power. But Korah is exposed as a rebel when he opened his mouth against Moses. Therefore, his judgment is the ground opened its mouth against Korah and testified who God really speaks to. All right, let's look at another example. Genesis 9:20 through 25, NLT. After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine that he had made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers. Then Shem and Japheth took a robe, held it over their shoulders, and backed into the tent to cover their father. As they did this, they looked the other way so they would not see him naked. 24. When Noah woke up from his stupor, he learned what Ham, his youngest son, had done. Then he cursed Canaan, the son of Ham. May Canaan be cursed. May he be the lowest servants to all his relatives. All right, Noah built a vineyard. Noah is exposed by Ham after getting drunk from his vineyard. Now, we know about this story because it's in the Bible. The Bible is God's authority. The Bible tells us that Noah was laying there naked. God can say that about his authority. God has the authority to say that about Noah, but it's not Ham's position to do that. We're going to take a look at a vineyard in a second, but here's something to understand, guys. Vineyards are hard to make. They take a long time, like physically making the actual vineyard. We're going to look like what a vineyard looked like back then, because After I was in Afghanistan, I realized, oh, their vineyards are like way different than what we picture. We picture like the little strings, like 3 little strings, and then it's like manicured just the right way. It is not like that back in the day. They're very difficult to build. So Ham likely thought of his chance long before this incident ever happened, because that vineyard was not built overnight, and probably Noah needed help from his sons to build this. So Ham is probably plotting for a while, and he probably thought to make himself superior to his father by exposing him, but instead it was Ham's son that was sent to the lowest position. And possibly Ham was also jealous of Shem and generally wanted a higher position in the family. And after all, like, Ham is seeing this all happen. Like, he's seeing probably his opportunity coming, and he's probably thinking to himself, like, well, Shem's not calling him out, so maybe I should. He might be thinking like that. But I want to show you guys this picture. This is an actual, can they see this? Yeah? This is an actual vineyard from Afghanistan. This is what they look like in Afghanistan. And we would, like, go on patrol, and, like, I could be walking down this trail, and, like, my head wouldn't even be coming above this wall. And these walls are so thick that gunfire couldn't even go through them. And that's why we would usually walk through the vineyards. But they didn't look green like this during the wintertime. They only turn green during the spring. And these vines are very thick. They're very big. And these walls are just super, super thick. So it's not exactly easy to make one of these vineyards. And that's why I want you guys to realize, like, you know, when we read these Bible stories, you know, within 2 to 3 to 4 verses, maybe 1 chapter, we know the whole story. We know like who it was, what they did, what the outcome was. Boom, 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 boom. But in real life, these things can take years to happen, years to build up. And the reason we need to really be aware of this is because there's a chance as we go through our daily lives, something like this might be happening in our minds or in our hearts, and we're not even aware of it. We're just thinking about our lives. You know, we're just getting up, we're going through our day, we're doing whatever it is we need to do, and there's thoughts happening in the back of our mind we're not really thinking about because we're just going through our life. But it takes a long time. It takes a long time to build one of these vineyards, and probably it took a long time for Ham to come to that decision point. And it may not have just been like he just encountered it 1 second. He probably was thinking about it for a while. All right, let's take a look at another example with a different outcome. 1 Samuel 24:3. When he came to the sheep shelters beside the road, a cave was there, and Saul went inside to relieve himself. Unguarded, he was especially vulnerable to attack. Now, Saul didn't know it, but David and his men were hiding in the recesses of that very cave. David's guards thought it was the perfect time to strike. David's men, this must be the very day the Eternal One told you about. Watch, I will give your enemy to you, and you will do whatever you please with him. David crept forward quietly and moved in so close he was able to cut off a corner from Saul's robe. 1 Samuel 24:19. Who has ever come across his enemy in such a vulnerable position and yet allowed him to go away safely? So may the Eternal reward you richly for the good you have done for me today. The last verse was Saul responding to David when he realized that David had the opportunity to kill him but didn't. I want to focus on this because it kept using the word vulnerable. God made his authority, King Saul, vulnerable. He was exposed. And the other thing I want to point out and really take a look at here is what was King David's men saying to King David? What were they advising him? I didn't include all the verses, but in other parts, they're basically saying, isn't this what God told you? That's the verse right there. This must be the very day the Eternal One told you about. See, they're basically trying to prophesy. They're trying to speak for God to David. And it doesn't work like that. They shouldn't be advising David like that. But David chooses correctly. David does not take advantage of God's authority, who is made to look vulnerable in front of him. I think I covered most of this. See, God led King Saul to be vulnerable in the cave, but David did not strike him. because as we know, King Saul still carried the authority. And it's only, we talked about this before, it's only God's job to judge his authority, which is modern day pastors, not the people of the church. And also, David's men were falsely prophesying to David to entice him to sin. So really, it's like both sides are coming against David. Even his own people are trying to entice him to sin because his own people are still thinking, they're really thinking about, they want the kingdom. They want the high positions. They don't want to be hiding in caves no more. You know, they know David's supposed to be the man, but they're tired of running. They want that spot. They want to be the top general in charge of the real kingdom, not running around anymore in this cave. But they're with David. They're going to stick with him, but they're not really thinking about God's ways. They're gonna try to use God's words to entice David, but they're not thinking about God's ways. They're thinking about the position. They're thinking about their comfort. They're thinking about what they want, which is kind of showing why they're even there with David in the first place. So there's a lot of takeaways. How should the lay people respond? Okay, so when I think about all these examples, right? You got God's authority who's made to look vulnerable. You got the person who tried to take advantage of it, whether they did or didn't. But then there's also people that maybe they're not the authority, they're just the lay people. They're not the one trying to take advantage of the authority, they're just in the middle. So if you're just in the middle, what do? Like what's your response to this situation? All right? I made a list based on the choices that others made on the stories we just went over. 1, always examine your heart for a buildup of bitterness toward authority. And Elder Senior preached on this pretty extensively. Some really good messages. He preached on it twice. Really, really good messages. And this is something we all got to be careful about. And I personally think this is probably what happened to Noah, or probably what happened to Ham with Noah, and probably a lot of people that end up coming against God's authorities. They don't just like out of the blue do it. They don't just see like one mistake that authority made and be like, oh, I got you. They probably in their heart, it was a buildup, and then they were waiting for a chance to strike. And God was trying to draw them out by making his authority appear vulnerable. All right, so another thing is, number 2, don't reach for authority that isn't yours, whether it be authority or position or title or blessing. So a lot of times where people are making this mistake is they're trying to reach for something that isn't theirs. We saw King David's men trying to falsely entice King David and falsely prophesy. They're after their comfort. They're after what they want. And we see that happen over and over. They're thinking in terms of flesh. This also, I'm going to tie this in. I'll finish this list here, but I'm way ahead on time. This has to do with also what Peter did in the garden, right? Because even really, Peter betrayed the Lord in the garden, right? And you might think he betrayed him when he was called out. There was a key verse, and I didn't include it here, but one of the third time Peter was questioned, didn't I see you in the garden? It says in John that it was basically the cousin of the person whose ear got cut off. Didn't I see you in the garden? So now Peter was defending himself, right? Now he's defending himself because like this person like literally saw him in the garden. He's defending his actions. So at the time he's betraying the Lord really is tied to what he did in the garden. So his betrayal actually also happened in the garden. Why? He's doing the very thing that King David's men were trying to tell him to do in the cave, right? They're thinking carnal. They're thinking flesh. They're thinking position. They're thinking power. See, up until that point, Jesus' disciples still were thinking in terms of just kick the Romans out, let's be in charge. They're thinking of the natural authority, and they still didn't understand it yet. The difference with Peter is that he fiercely repented afterwards so he could become restored. So Peter did deny the Lord. A denial happened when he said, no, I don't know him. But the betrayal he did also happened in the garden. All right. Number 3, don't join with anyone trying to gather people to themselves. There's no need for this. This just doesn't have to happen. Like, just pay attention. Like, when you see, if we're praying here and someone out there like just randomly starts gathering other people to pray with them, like not with the group, this is what it is, right? And we saw it with Korah, right? Korah basically, he found people with a similar spirit as him. His spirit was against Moses. He had a rebellious spirit. So just like sometimes, birds of a flock fly together. So he found other people who also had rebellious spirits. He's like, hey, you know what I think? How's that sound to you? Oh, sounds good to you. Follow me, right? So what does a layperson do? Don't follow anyone trying to gather people to themselves. All right, number 4. Distance yourself from anyone who speaks against authority. Don't listen to them. I wrote social distance yourself. In other words, physical, literal distance. They should feel awkward. They should feel uncomfortable. They should feel like they're in a void. They should start to think, why is no one around me? So they can begin to think, maybe it's me. And you don't want to open your ears to them, because whatever spirit is operating in them, you got to be careful. You might become vulnerable to that. And that's why basically Moses said to the people, you need to distance yourself right now, physically. Don't touch anything they own. Don't be anywhere near them. You get as far as you can. And those people had a very short amount of time to create distance between them and the leaders of the rebellion. Now, number 5, cover your authority and pay no attention to the vulnerability. Now, in this case, I put quotes around the vulnerability, because most of these vulnerabilities was just God making it appear like a vulnerability. That's why this sermon is called It's a Trap. It's not a trap for God's leader. It's a trap for the people that have that rebellious spirit. He's setting them up. He's trying to, you see, God's trying to heal his church body. And that's why when the leader goes through this supposed vulnerability, the body goes to the next level because it just got healed from those spirits that were trying to operate against the authority, that when they saw the chance, they took it. And guess what? In the end, they ended up getting the very curse they were trying to put on the leader. They were the ones that took it, and they got removed from the people, and now the congregation has a greater fear of God, and the authority is going to get raised up, and now the whole body goes to the next level. The whole body. Number 6, don't touch anything that belongs to the rebels. This is just, I think it's about as simple as that one gets. Like, just, if it's theirs, it's going with them, don't touch it. Number 7, don't try to advise your authority on how they should respond, right? It's not your position. It's not your job. God will judge his authority, and that's a terrifying thing. And we know from our senior pastor that many pastors end up in hell. And based on his testimony, it's a very severe part of hell. God will judge his authorities. It's not, you just don't have to. If you're anywhere beneath an authority, you don't even need to try to figure out if they're doing it right or wrong, because God will take care of it. Number 8, don't criticize the rebels. Leave that in God's hands. So if there are people who are going after God, all you got to do is you just create just distance. You just social distance yourself from them. You just create as much distance as you need to, and fast, right? You just create distance. That's it. You don't need to criticize them. You don't need to judge them, because the reality is it's coming anyway, right? If you try to judge, that doesn't even make sense. Judgment's already on its way. It's already coming. All right, and then number 9, those who cover the authority will be the ones who receive blessings and positions intended for the ones who betrayed authority. Now, I want to explain why were blessings and positions intended for those who betrayed the authority. Now, Jesus gave authority to Judas. He gave him authority. He had a position. He was an apostle, right? He already had a title, right? Ham was blessed. He was already blessed. Canaan was blessed. Why? Because they come under Noah. So as long as these individuals are coming under their authority, they're walking with the blessing that comes to their authority, whether they deserve it or not. It's coming to the authority, and they're just in line. So they're going to receive it. That's God's law. It's in effect. They're going to receive that blessing, but God knows what's hidden in their heart. But as long as that person is under their authority, God's not going to take away that blessing or that position. That person has to choose to walk away from it. Because as long as they're in line, it's coming to them. They have to choose to get out of line. They choose to get out of line when they fall for the trap. God knows what's in their heart, and they go after it. I thought, to me, it's like a predatorial type of spirit, right? You see an opportunity and you go for it, something that doesn't belong to you. So I was reading about like behaviors of wolves, right? And like, when do wolves attack? Like, what would make them think they can attack? And one thing I read is they think to attack when they haven't been around people in a long time. So when wolves haven't been around people in a long time, they don't have fear of people. And this is something I think that the reason these events happen in the Bible, most of the events we just talked about, they weren't like near each other in terms of time. You're talking hundreds of years where most of these events have happened, right? And so you have a period of time, like long period of time, where there's not really a significant presence of God on the earth that they know about, right? So in this example, what I'm trying to tell you is people have lost their fear of God. And these are the ones that I wrote about here. They're not all Old Testament, right? We know about Ananias and Sapphira. They did the same thing. And that's New Testament. That's grace age. And, Elder Senior already said there's a false grace gospel out there, and it's very popular. It's very popular. And one of the things it'll teach you is that you can get away with this kind of stuff. And the only reason churches get away with this kind of stuff is because they don't really have any authority or any presence. So they're just kind of doing their own thing. We all want more authority and presence of God, but just like assistant pastor preached about last week, I think, that's dangerous. We got to be ready for that. Now's the time to get these things out of our hearts, and you can't assume it's not you. So, like, this is constantly what I think about when I'm praying, and I'm trying to like find these things in my heart. But if not, I'm trying to say, like, are these things in my heart? Because when more light shines, like, the sin that's in our heart is going to want to hide and dodge from it. And this is our time. The grace we get is the time to get this kind of stuff out of our heart, because it's going to get more and more serious, because we don't even know all the things that are hiding down there. And as God takes this church and this ministry to the next level, and our senior pastor to the next level, that's closer to God. His light is going to expose deeper down into our hearts, revealing more of these types of things. And we just have to say to ourselves, like, that could be me. That could easily be me. And now's my chance to take the conditioning, whatever it might be, whatever the conditioning is, whether it be correction from the pastors or something that plays out naturally in your life, and then you're like, oh, that was God correcting me. We gotta embrace that with gratefulness, so that we don't end up in this camp right here. I think I should have made more slides. I had a lot of examples. Okay, I was going to talk about Moses too. Did I skip that slide? I don't think I put Moses' slide up. Oh yeah. Well, Moses and Korah, but I wanted to talk about Moses and Pharaoh. All right, Moses and Pharaoh. I was thinking about this. So all these stories you guys already know. You already know these stories. Moses and Pharaoh. Why why did God allow, why did he make it take so long at the Red Sea? Why did he make it take so long? You guys have already heard a lot of examples. Those are all really good. But I was thinking about this from a military perspective. God wanted to take out all of Pharaoh's army. But you have to understand the way armies work. They don't all just sit in one place. That doesn't make sense, because then the rest of your country isn't safe, right? So imagine Egypt. It's a vertical nation. And if you guys want, if you have time, you can pull up a picture of Egypt. If not, it's no big deal. If you find it, you find it. If you don't, you don't. Egypt is vertical, based on the Nile River. Okay? They're more or less coming from the capital, which is towards the delta on the north side of the nation, right? That's more or less where they're coming out of. That's where Pharaoh is more or less located. That's where the people of Israel are more or less coming out of. But you got to realize Pharaoh's army is stationed all up and down Egypt, right? It's a lot of territory. So for Pharaoh to suddenly tell his whole army, let's go, it's not like if you wanted to go to LA right now, 4 hours later you're there because you hopped on the interstate. It doesn't work like that. So if Pharaoh sends the message to his army, first of all, it's got to go out on a horse, however distance it goes, and then the word's got to get out. All the people got to report to their base and then start marching north. So it takes a while for his whole army to go, but you got to think right at the beginning, Pharaoh and whatever his main army contingent that would have been at the capital probably started their chase right away. But God wants to take it, but he probably sent word, right, for the rest of his army to follow behind him. So the rest of his army's coming, but he's already got a lead contingent. God wants to take out the whole army. So as far as the Israelite people are concerned, obviously they see Pharaoh and his army, but they don't know the rest of Pharaoh's army has got to come up the Nile and over and around. And so those extra days they're waiting. And I used to think, how can Pharaoh be so dumb, right? I mean, he's got this fire pillar blocking him. You guys remember? Can you pull up that verse? Can you pull up that verse where it says basically there was a pillar blocking Pharaoh from going after them before the Red Sea was opened up? And I used to wonder about that as a kid, right? What, why not just let them go, open up the Red Sea right away and, it'll just happen the same way. But what came to my spirit, it was just yesterday, I was like, oh man, I want to take out that whole army, the whole army. And that would have taken days at the fastest, a couple weeks maybe, for Pharaoh to get word out and to get his whole army back up the Nile, over and back over to wherever it is they were at the Red Sea. And so God was holding Pharaoh off long enough to gather up all of Pharaoh's army right there, just bottled up, just angry, ready to go after Moses. And this is the trap, is God makes his authority look vulnerable. God made Moses look vulnerable in Pharaoh's eyes. And Pharaoh, in one sense, as he's seeing this fire pillar, you would think he would think better. But he's gaining confidence because more of his army is showing up behind him. Before he just had his army that was stationed with him in the capital. Now he's got the next contingent from the city that was south of that. And now he's got the next contingent from the city south of that. And his whole army is now just stacked up behind him. And Pharaoh's like, I got everyone behind me. I'm not worried about this fire pillar. As soon as it moves, I'm taking out that vulnerable guy right there. And that's the trap. Now, when we think about events like that, when we think about stories like that, it's really hard to connect that to our lives. But in the book of Hebrews, it says, we got to look at the examples. The author of Hebrews is basically saying all of God's people died in the desert to help you know better of what not to do, right? That's New Testament. That's grace age, right? Hebrews is written in the New Testament. So all those warnings that happen in the Old Testament, they're still true, and that echoes all the way up to right now. So even though we're excited about what's coming next and we're anticipating more of Jesus, the most important thing we need to do is just keep searching our heart for whatever might be in here. And it's going to come down to whatever it is to you that is the most important thing, right? So if you're concerned about money, God might make his authority look vulnerable with money. If you're concerned about whatever it is you have in your heart that you're mostly concerned about, God can make his authority look vulnerable in that area so you go after them. And so you want to make sure that you don't end up doing that by constantly taking this time to search your heart to see if you have any of those things in there. I think those were all the examples that I had planned to preach on. Covered it pretty fast. All right, so we'll end it there. Let's give the Lord a hand.